The Sikh Human Rights Group proudly presents our Neurodiversity speaker series. Today's topic, why the employment rate is so low for those with autism and what we can do to redress this. Today you'll be listening to Ms Reena Anand, a lawyer and former ombudsman specialising in consumer vulnerability and the Equality Act. Reena founded her consultancy after her son was diagnosed with autism and she realised how little representation and bespoke support there was for BAME parents in similar situations. Her work focuses on recognising cultural biases and misconceptions which can impact BAME autistic children, getting a diagnosis and accessing support. Reena writes about her parenting experience, lends her voice to discussions about the impact of health and social policy on BAME communities, delivers talks to organisations seeking to support their employees who have autistic children, and delivers workshops for parents and communities who want to support their members more inclusively. Reena is on the co-production board at Abilities, which helps organisations use autistic neurodivergence to increase value. She is a trustee at the Racial Equality Foundation, a national charity which promotes racial equality in social support and public services. She is also the chair of the governing body at her local primary school. So welcome, Reena, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me on to the podcast.
You're most welcome. Reena, could I please ask you to begin by telling our audience a little bit about your experiences or understanding of the factors behind the low employment rate in the United Kingdom for those with autism?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we know from data published by the Office of National Statistics back in 2021 is that 1 in 5 autistic people in the UK are in any form of employment. And basically that is the lowest number of people that fall under the bracket of being disabled who are in employment. And it's very low, and it really contrasts with the fact that autistic people want to work, but often the opportunities aren't there for them to engage in work meaningfully, or if they secure work, then to retain that employment as well. And often that is not to do with their condition, but the lack of flexibility around the adjustments that they need in order for them to thrive and succeed. And I think key challenges in securing employment include, not limited to, but include the fact that recruitment processes are geared towards neurotypical people, so people who don't have cognitive differences. And there's very much still a one-size-fits-all type of approach to recruitment. So it might be a questionnaire, a competency-based interview, but it's very much, one way of doing it. And the problem with that is, whilst some people might think, well, that's equal, it's actually not equitable. So it's not, by having a one-size-fits-all approach, you're actually creating a disadvantage for autistic people and other people with neurodiversities, because you're not providing a level playing field for them to truly showcase their talent and bring themselves to the table. So, I mean, those are just some of the I think some of the background issues around why there is such a low employment rate for autistic people. And it highlights that we do have a problem, because disabled people are actually very beneficial contributors to the economy. And we understand, okay, not every single autistic person can work, but certainly a significant number of autistic people who are able to work are not able to find employment.
Thank you very much, Reena. That was very excellent. Now, kind of delving into what you've previously stated, what, in your mind, are the greatest challenges and issues associated with those with autism finding, obtaining, and retaining, most importantly, employment in the current market?
I mean, it's a multifaceted problem, but some of the issues are the lack of support in finding employment in the first place for autistic adults, a general lack of understanding around neurodiversity in workplaces and by employers, as well as autism. Often autistic people as well, they're afraid of asking for what they need, because they don't want to be seen as troublemakers or being seen as a burden for their employers. And that's not a reflection of themselves, but often a reflection of the culture in a particular workplace. So if people talk loosely, you know, if employers are talking about that person being really awkward or that person being like that just because they've asked for something, it inhibits people from asking for what they need in order to succeed. Often autistic people don't know what support a company can provide, and often companies don't know actually what is readily available to them to provide for their autistic employees to succeed. And there is a real misconception that making reasonable adjustments in the workplace is costly and challenging and burdensome in some way. But actually, the vast majority of reasonable adjustments for autistic people are very low cost and could be as simple as having a corner desk, having a space where an autistic person can go and do some focused work for a while without interruption, having a pair of noise cancelling headphones. Often these are very low level cost items that can make a massive difference towards an autistic person retaining their job or leaving.
Thank you very much, Reena. That was extremely interesting and insightful. Now moving on to more towards the individual. What role does individuality, in your opinion, have in the workplace? So you mentioned, best practice, reasonable adjustments, and so on and so forth. And the example that I always give in this instance is, so for example, how does this affect the manner in which employers respond or should respond to employing those with autism? Meaning, using the case example of a company employing an autistic female, usually new starters. There's 4 departments within the company. They would ordinarily spend 6 months within each department and move around them with their cohort of new starters. But in the company's eyes, reasonable adjustments meant she would be tied to a desk in one department for the 2-year period, and then that would be suitable for her as an autistic individual, because they felt that maybe a change in her environment would lead to further problems, when the reality of the situation was owing to her individuality, autistic traits, meant that she would have been perfectly happy to have moved around the departments. And what the issue really was that she wasn't was staying with the main cohort of those being onboarded. So yeah, kind of linking it back to the original question, what role does individuality have in the workplace in your mind?
I think a huge, a huge difference. But I think just quickly, whilst I have the point in my head, most adjustments for people who are autistic actually benefit all employees. And I think it's really important for employers to understand this point, that, who wouldn't appreciate a quiet space to work when they're trying to do something that really requires a high level of concentration? Who wouldn't appreciate not being disturbed at their desk, or having a mechanism at their desk that told people, okay, right now, I'm sitting here, I need to not be disturbed. Distraction is one of the biggest time killers at the moment in the workplace, and particularly in open plan offices. And it's probably one of the reasons why so many companies have actually, over the pandemic, been more productive, because people have been able to do their work without constantly being, having people walk past their desk and make comments, or have a chat, or whatever it is. So I think with regards to your questions around individuality, I think in that case, that is really a classic case of failing to engage with your employee and their needs. And individuality is so important, because if you create the conditions to expedite someone's success, you're winning both ways. You have a loyal employee who is not experiencing anxiety. We also, we know that the highest levels of anxiety are experienced by autistic employees, which can lead to burnout and lead them to leave the workplace altogether. And you can absolutely mitigate all of that by creating the conditions for that employee to thrive, which ultimately benefits the employer, because then they have a hugely dedicated, loyal, productive employee who's happy at doing their job. So for me, it's like a complete no-brainer why you wouldn't embrace someone's individuality. And ultimately, if you're looking at it from a business case, which I'm not a huge fan of, but that seems to be the language which many employers understand, to have diversity in thought and leadership ultimately is going to contribute to a business's reach and their which people they can relate to. If you only have one type of person filling your boardrooms and filling your key leadership roles and only doing things a particular way, you've massively narrowed the space in which you are going to operate in, irrespective of your industry. So, even from a business case point of view, get as diverse a range of ethnicities, of race, of neurodiversities around that table so that you can actually cater your services to the broader general public whom all these people are, there. I think as well, with regards to the example that you gave about the lady who was just assigned that desk, people think that autistic people don't like change, and I think about my own son. Yeah, okay, he doesn't like change, but that doesn't mean you avoid all change in life altogether. It just means you set that person up for success. So you tell that person, okay, this is the structure. For 6 months, you'll be here, you'll be working with this person at this place and working with them around where they'll sit and what conditions will be optimum. And then again for the next 6 months, etc. Assuming that this lady would never want to move, it's quite debilitating. It's not actually respecting her as an individual either. And with the right steps put in place, there's no reason why she couldn't have moved around and successfully completed that.
Thank you very much, Reena. I couldn't agree with you more. Now, kind of moving back to the point you mentioned earlier on, in 2021, the United Kingdom's Office for National Statistics found that those with severe or specific learning difficulties, autism and mental illnesses or other nervous disorders were least likely to be in work than any other disabled group. So therefore, in your professional and obviously your personal experience, what should we be doing on an individual and a societal level to address this?
Huge question. And there won't be a single silver bullet answer to this either. But, the seeds are there. They just, and people have been talking about this for a long time. There are things that can be done. So for us, if you look at broader on a more societal level, it's vital that we see clear action and commitment on the autism strategy and the national disability strategy from the government to proactively close the employment gap for autistic people, especially following the pandemic, which has really created more problems in terms of isolation and for autistic people as well as others, actually, not just autistic people. We, as I mentioned, earlier, anxiety is also a huge issue. So employers also need to be cognizant of some of the things that they ought to be doing to support all of their employees and to avoid burnout, which is also an issue that doesn't only affect autistic employees. There is research actually from Autistica, the charity, that has highlighted that autistic people are more likely to be underpaid, underemployed and poorly supported when they are in work. And so that actually also forces many employees who might suspect they could be autistic from coming forward and asking for either the support to have the assessment or actually disclosing to their employers that they are autistic, which, again, that's a wider dialogue that needs to happen. But I think it does have to start with the top, at the top, like in any organization, right? What's the culture? It starts at the top. Funding is always an issue, and I think with autism as well, there's a lot more funding, though I would say not enough, but there is a lot more service provision and resources aimed at autism in children, but then there's far less towards funding or research for autistic adults in the workplace. And then when you add in other protected characteristics, so research on autistic Black, Asian and minority ethnic people, there just isn't any. I'm constantly scouring papers and they all say the same thing. We would like to know more about this, but there just isn't research happening in this space. I think there's also, from an employer perspective, still outdated perceptions on a person's suitability to work based on them being disabled. There is still a lot of stereotypes and biases that influence whether employers take on autistic employees because they think they're just going to be hard work and it's, they're not going to be able to do their job. And actually there are many successful autistic adults out there. In fact, I would say some of the key game changers in society have all been brought about by autistic entrepreneurs. You know, the founder of Tesla, and the Nobel Prize-winning professor. There are ample examples out there to show that, you know, with the right conditions, autistic people can thrive. But still, employer attitude, there needs to be a real focus on kind of changing that. So, you know, other businesses who've shown what's possible. There's a business called Auticon who exclusively employs autistic adults to do their data. It's all a tech company. There's JP Morgan have got an autism at work program to bring in autistic individuals. The people who can see the potential for their company to grow and succeed by having autistic employees are the ones who are doing actually very, very well with it. And it can be, like I said earlier, the adjustments don't need to be massive. So from an employer perspective, instead of doing a one-to-one interview, or if you are going to do one-to-one interviews, keep them short, keep them to 30 minutes. Be clear with the person of what they're going to expect and who's going to be speaking to them. You know, there are very simple ways to be more inclusive.
Thank you very much. I completely agree with your last point, and I may add what we found very helpful can be very, very small adjustments, such as if you host a meeting, allowing the meeting room to be open an hour beforehand in order to allow neurodiverse individuals to attend, to get comfortable in their new environment, and then to go into the meeting. But most importantly, after the meeting, we found there's a lot of discourse around away from the main points of the meeting. So what can be very, very helpful for neurodiverse individuals is just a list of 5 action points to be taken away from that meeting, what was agreed upon, and then it kind of sets the benchmark, and as you ordinarily find, they'll follow it up very, very well. But anyway, moving on to the next question, as it were. We touched on it before, but specifically in your mind, how can employers ensure that their recruitment processes are made more accessible to those with autism? So looking at not only the job application stage, but the interviewing stages, and any other methods that employers may not have thought about up till now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to labor that point that, autistic people, majority of them, they do want to work. Nobody comes into the workplace not wanting to do a brilliant job or not wanting to be great at what they do. So this whole perception by employers of, disability being somehow exaggerated, or the employee just being awkward, it's all myth, and it's very outdated. So, like anybody else, an autistic person equally wants to be an economic contributor and have the same value and satisfaction we all get from doing work that we love. But the things that employers could do, for example, they can. I think it's really important that they're open and honest about their flaws. So if you are in an organization, you run an organization, and you recognize you don't have any neurodiverse talent in your workplace, then, be okay with the fact that that is your current situation, and then proactively take steps to change that. How can you do that? You need to get input in from autistic people. There's a really popular hashtag at the moment with nothing about us without us. And if you really want to know what an autistic person needs in your workplace, ask them. That you won't cause offense. They are the best people to tell you where the blind spots are in your organization, in your work environment, that make it very challenging for them to work in. Okay, but also something I've seen in many organizations is, and I've seen this not just with neurodiversity, but also with Black, Asian, and minority ethnic networks and other networks. Often this work is put upon the people who need it, but with no remuneration or sort of time back or anything like that. So don't expect, as an employer, your autistic employees to be feeding into this strategy with, and putting all their time and effort into this, and you not compensating them in some way. Maybe it's maybe they get time back on something, or reduced target or whatever, but equate that time valuably and value that, because otherwise it's just exploitation. I think, look around. If it's not diverse, the chances are you are very one size fits all, and you need a bit more diversity, training, and well, you need to implement a bit more diversity. I think think about other alternatives to interview as well. Would work experience work in your type of industry? Would giving someone a project, a short project, be a better way of testing their suitability for the job? Also, before an interview, if you're going to do an interview, can you send the photographs of the people who are going to be on the panel? Can you potentially send the questions? I recently actually had applied for some grant funding to do some autism parenting workshops. And I'm not neurodiverse, but I massively appreciated being told who is going to be on the panel, the 5 people on the panel, the biography of those people, so what their relevance was to be on that panel and the work that they were engaged in, as well as being told broadly, not the exact questions, but actually you're going to be asked about this, you're going to be asked about this, you're going to be asked about this. That just helped me to perform at my optimum. And I don't see why you wouldn't want that for somebody coming into your company. But also I think, we do focus, there are lots of conversations around recruitment, but we also need to focus on retention. Retention is really huge. Often, autistic people do burn out, and it can be very, very challenging, and it can be mitigated if you've got the right ongoing support. So, what does that look like in your company? Is there a network? How, what communication can you send out about socializing, break times, outside of work, understanding different organizational cultures, as much as possible, sharing that with the autistic employee and getting their feedback, being open to receiving the feedback on what works for them and what doesn't work for them. I think finally, the point I'd want to make, as well as the fact that just being flexible, so saying 9 to 5 and that's it, it's just unhelpful. And I think post-pandemic as well, that's becoming quite an archaic way of operating. I think knowing that if someone is more productive at a particular time, be open to being a bit flexible around the hours that your employee might need. But ultimately, all of these adjustments, these conversations, the support, you're not doing an autistic person any favors by putting this structure in place. What you're doing is matching your autistic employee to the right job in your organization and fertilizing that soil with all the right conditions for that person to really bloom and contribute valuably to your organization.
Thank you very much, Reena. That was truly excellent. And this is just a bit of a plug to our listeners who maybe have lifelong neurological characteristics such as autism. But the Sikh Human Rights Group is currently arranging the establishment of employability package. So we're starting the initiative by offering a limited number of spaces, admittedly, but a limited number of space for work experience with the Sikh Human Rights Group, get an understanding of the human rights work that we do in our various fields, including neurodiversity, but going on to gender, artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth. So if you are interested, please reach out to us via our website at shrg.ngo, and please address it to me, Carter Arbuthnot. But Reena, moving forward, this question is really tailored towards those with lifelong neurological characteristics who are currently sitting at home trying to get themselves onto the employment ladder, or onto the first rung of the ladder. So in your professional opinion, what support is currently available to the individuals that may be in those circumstances, both nationally and regionally? That can be organisational or charity support. Over to you.
I will do a quick plug as well at this point for a tool that is being created by Ability. So as you mentioned in the intro, I'm on the co-production board of a fantastic organisation that specialises in helping autistic people gain employment, but also help employers understand how they can better support their autistic employees. And we're currently developing a tool which is free, which will be completely free for the autistic population to use, to talk about, to highlight all the conditions that are optimum for you to work in. And it's not that's it. Once you've done it, you can do it as many times as you like, because obviously we're human. We have, we might operate differently in different settings, but what it will do is, in place of having a huge conversation with an employer at the outset, you can provide them with the PDF that says, this is a snapshot of the sorts of things that might help me. And then you can then build on that later. So that is coming, and I'll share that with you, Carlos, so you can share that with your listeners too. But other organizations are, the local disability employment advisors at the job centres, There's an organisation called Plus that can help prepare you for work. That's plus.org.uk. There's also, if you are already in work or have an interview for a job, a scheme called Access to Work that provides grants as well to support autistic people in the workplace. And other organisations that do offer employment support are Ambitious About Autism, Auticon, which is the organisation I mentioned earlier, who exclusively employ autistic employees who are interested in technology and computing, Care Trade, Remploy, and there are some really interesting articles on livingautism.com.
That's really, really helpful, I'm sure. Moving on to my next question, and this is just more generally speaking to employers, but in your professional experiences or understanding, what are or can be the benefits of employing those with autism or other lifelong neurological characteristics?
So, you know, there is that very popular saying, when you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. So I will just say that because obviously we are all people, and even on the spectrum, you know, people, what we know about autism now is that people can fluctuate in between, you know, the different facets of the spectrum. So, but what I will say, some of the most common threads that have come out around the benefits of having autistic employees are the creativity, the out of the box thinking, so the having highly discriminating senses. And a really great example of that is Temple Grandin, who is by far and above the leading kind of horse. I forget the term entirely, but her profession is around husbandry, and she is the leading expert in it, and she attributes that to her autism. I'd highly recommend, actually, if anyone is not heard of Temple Grandin, check out her profile. She's still engaged in this work. But also, you know, autistic people have a very unique ability to spot problems and potential flaws at, you know, coming down the road in the future. Accuracy, efficiency, attention to detail, you know, the ability to really hyper focus on the detail, to pick up things that often neurotypical people can miss. Ability to follow structured projects really well. Being able to communicate very clearly and concisely, something which I think many companies, and I worked in a few, you know, often fall foul of. So you can have a meeting and everything's talked about in the round, and it's really unclear 1 hour later what the actions are and who's doing them. Whereas with an autistic person, you know, if they're leading that meeting, it'll be very clear who is doing what, when they're doing it, and chances are the meeting will probably be shorter because it'll be more efficient. Excellent memory, very high levels of technical ability, which is why places like TfL, Auticon, and other industries which require a high level of technical detail exclusively will employ autistic people in particular high-level roles. Their precise use of language. I mean, I could go on and on. There are, you know, there's another example of a company, a Danish company called Specialising, who found that their IT consultants on average, their autistic IT consultants on average had a 10% better rate at checking the software codes for errors than their non-autistic colleagues. You know, that's all that attention to detail and the ability to, you know, focus. And, you know, there are other, like I said earlier, the other, you know, some of the key successes and movements in society have been propelled by autistic entrepreneurs. So there was loads of benefit, so much benefit of having autistic employees as part of your workforce.
Thank you very much. I couldn't agree more. Reena, my last question to you is very generic in nature. Do you have any other matter that you wish to discuss? But really what I'm trying to elicit is, do you have a message to both our listeners with lifelong neurodivergent characteristics who are currently seeking employment, or employers who are trying to enhance employment opportunities within their industries? What take-home message would you like to give them?
So I think for autistic people, I would say, don't feel like you need to do this alone. There are lots of organizations. There's also the Sikh Human Rights Group. There are many places where you can find other autistic young people who have been on this journey, and social media in some ways has made it easier because there are a lot of people who are openly sharing their work journeys and things that help them in the workplace or have helped them secure work. So, reach out. Don't feel like you need to do this on your own. You absolutely don't. There are also organizations which specialize in just finding your community so that you can share with each other how you can best secure the opportunity that's right for you, that will help you to really unlock your potential and enable you to thrive at whatever it is that you're passionate about. For employers, I would say there's no point in focusing on shame. So if you look at your employee base, if you look at your senior leadership team and actually everyone looks the same, thinks the same, know that you have a diversity issue, but also know you are empowered to change that. And there are plenty of people like myself, like Carlos and other organizations who are ready and willing to help you start having those conversations and looking at how can we increase neurodiversity awareness and understanding in your workplace, but also attract neurodiverse talent. So that would be my message to employers. And then I think the only final thing I'd kind of say is what we know from research about intersectionality is that the more protected characteristics under the Equality Act people identify with, the greater the barriers and the chances of them being discriminated against. So if you have an organization that has autistic people, but you don't have any Black, Asian, or minority ethnic or autistic people, ask yourself why. What are you doing to address that? Ideally, a diverse and inclusive workplace where people feel like they belong is made up of people across all of the protected characteristics under the Equality Act. And if you find that you're not tapping into a particular group, then I would say always the best person to ask is actually that group, because they will be able to look at your organization and tell you. But there are also people like me who can happily start that conversation with you. I think there's a lot of dialogue out there about the business case for having neurodiverse employees, and yes, there is loads of data out there that says if you've got a diverse workforce, you're likely to make more money and be more productive. Fine, but for me, this is a hearts and minds issue. This is not a bottom line issue. This is we are people, we are a human race, we are made up differently, but that is part of our richness and we are able to contribute on that basis. So operate from that basis, not from the how, actually if we employ autistic people, we might make more money, because you'll become unstuck very quickly.
Reena, that's excellent. Thank you so much for taking the time out of what I know is an extremely busy schedule to be with us today. It's been wonderful having you on. I just have a few concluding remarks, and that is this podcast has been brought to you by the Sikh Human Rights Group. For more information about Ms Reena Anand and her projects and organisations she's currently involved in, or the Sikh Human Rights Group's projects and policies, please visit our website, the link to which can be found within the description to this video. Or alternatively, please visit our social media accounts at SHRG_NGO. I've been Carlos Arbuthnot. Thank you very much for listening.